Éimυ Γκούντμαν with DemocracyNow's Nārmín Sέikhh.
Egypt's ousted leader, Hosni Mubarak, is back in a Cairo courtroom today after a break in his ongoing trial. He faces charges of complicity in the deaths of 840 protesters during the crackdown on the popular uprising that began this past February. Well, Mubarak's trial and this latest ruling comes just as one of Egypt's most prominent revolutionary activists and bloggers has been released from prison after nearly 2 months behind bars. Alaa Fattah was ordered jailed by a military court on October 30th in a case that made headlines across Egypt and around the world. He was summoned to face charges that included inciting violence in what has become known as the Mασπέρο massacre, when 27 people were killed in a military crackdown on a protest made up of largely Coptic Christians in early October. Alaa Fattah refused to recognize the legitimacy of the military court to try him as a civilian and refused to answer any questions or cooperate with the court. Since the Egyptian revolution began, more than 12,000 civilians have been tried in military courts, a practice decried by human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch.
The military prosecutor ordered Alaa to be held pending investigation. He was eventually transferred to a civilian court released on Christmas Day after 56 days behind bars. While he was in prison, his wife Manal gave birth to their first child, a son they named Khaled, after Khaled Said, the young Egyptian businessman who was beaten to death by 2 policemen in Alexandria in June 2010 in a case that came to symbolize police brutality and helped spark the Egyptian revolution. After being released, Alaa Fattah went directly to Tahrir Square in his prison uniform, where he kissed his son and jubilant wife, and spoke out against the rule of the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, who've been governing Egypt since Mubarak was forced out of office. Today, Alaa Fattah joins us from Cairo. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Alaa, congratulations on getting out. Can you talk about your time in jail in this post-revolutionary period, the time that Mubarak has fallen?
Yes, hi, thank you for having me in. This is the second time that I get detained. The first time was during Mubarak's rule and in the early phases of our pro-democracy and anti-Mubarak movement, 5 years before the revolution back in 2006. And this time I actually went to the same prison. I was guarded by the same prison guards and so on. So it was a bit of a, in one way it was a bit of a letdown that, you know, even after we start the revolution and we toppled the dictator, I'm back at that same spot in the same place. But the solidarity movement, you know, the actions that people were taking while I was in prison to support me and support the cause of, you know, no military trials for civilians, and also, you know, to continue the revolution until we also topple the military regime. It was so overwhelming. I mean, like, my imprisonment led to such strong reaction that it made it very easy for me to, you know, survive and remain with high morals and so on in prison. And then there was this, you know, new revolutionary wave with protesters back in Tahrir, not related to my case. This is just how the flow of our revolution. And it was very exciting, but it was quite tough to know that all my friends and colleagues and family are risking their lives, some of them losing their eyes, some of them losing their lives, while I'm unable to participate or even know what's going on minute by minute as I'm used to.
Alaa, can we just go back a bit and explain, if you could explain what happened on that day, the day of the Mασπέρο massacre?
Yes, that was on the 9th of October. There was a big march planned by several movements that were born out of the Coptic Christian community, basically protesting, you know, sectarian strife, violence against churches, or, you know, and also laws that restrict building or renovating churches. So, and it was a peaceful march, and it was quite big. I mean, I think it was like the biggest march that to focus on the Coptic issues, you know, maybe 20 or 30,000. They marched from a popular neighborhood called Chobra, and the plan was to get just right here behind me were to surround the Mασπέρο building, which is where the state broadcast radio and TV broadcasts from. I think the symbolism around Mασπέρο is that state media have always been, you know, downplaying the role of Christians and any other minorities in Egypt, but also have been, you know, downplaying the reality of sectarian strife in the country. It was a peaceful march. They were supposed to just spend 1 hour in front of the building and then leave. But before they reached the building, they were attacked by the military. 3 armed personnel carriers drove through the crowds, killing 17 people, and then live bullets were used against the protesters. Most of the protesters fled the scene. Many were injured. Around 28 people died. Then they started resisting. They started breaking the pavement and resisting the military with rocks and clubs, or, you know, anything that they could get their hands on. During that time, the media crackdown operation, there was a media crackdown operation by the military also. They actually invaded a couple of buildings where independent TV channels were trying to cover the events live. The state broadcaster was showing a completely different picture. They started from the reaction, they started from the resistance, showing Christian protesters attacking the military. And then they started making false claims that tens of officers have been killed and so on, in what appears to have been a plan to incite sectarian strife. They were basically practically asking Muslims to come down and protect the army and attack any Christians that they find in the streets. Luckily, the revolutionary youth, the Tahrir youth, whatever you want to call them, and many of the human rights activists, radical political parties and whatnot, a few of them were, you know, participating in solidarity in that protest, and then hundreds of them went down to the streets when they heard the news, trying to figure out what is the truth. And trying to see what can be done. So we managed together to move the injured to hospitals, move our comrades who fell on that day to morgues, and then the hospitals and the morgues were being attacked. So we had to protect them, and then we had to make a stand and make sure that a proper autopsy and an investigation gets done, so that we have solid evidence and material that we could use to counter the military council's propaganda and the cover-up for that massacre.
And so why, Alaa, did you get arrested? Why did the military go after you?
Well, the way the military handled that case, incident legally, was to arrest the victims and then claim that they are the ones who attacked. And you know, that's a pattern that they've been using since then. They've used it in the recent events in Tahrir Square. And it's a very strange argument, but as we've seen everywhere in the world, really, you know, those in the argument and the discourse that those in power use has, you know, has automatic legitimacy, even if they're saying complete rubbish. So basically, they were saying 28 people died, you know, 28 protesters died, but it was the protesters who were attacking the military. The military never attacked, and nobody knows who killed the 28 protesters. And that's how they wanted to deal with it, and that's how they wanted to cover it up. And I think they felt that they are in a very strong position because they were tapping into this sectarian issue, which is, you know, which has existed in Egypt for long, and so you know, they were trying to build on that. That it's easy to to deny the victims any sympathy, and it's easy to deny them any agency also. And so they were, drunk on power and decided, why not also, bring in a few activists, get rid of a few activists who are maybe causing them a headache. And they specifically targeted the activists who, put in a lot of effort in exposing the reality of and the facts of what happened in that massacre, in the Mασπέρο incident. So there was a list of 11 activists, and I was at the top of that list. So I was the first one to be questioned. But they planned to arrest more. And so it was basically just convenience to try, and see if they can arrest and convict what they consider a key activist in the revolution. I don't think I am a key activist in the revolution, but I believe they think so. But also to punish, the people who worked hard on exposing the facts and the realities of what happened on that day.
So, Alaa, can you say a little about your time in detention? You were moved from one prison to another?
Yes, the first 5 days I was put in a pretty bad prison. Now all prisons in the world are bad. Like losing your freedom is quite tough. But also all prisons in Egypt are in very poor conditions, and so even if they don't torture you, just spending one night there is already a bit too much. But I was in a particularly bad prison, and they made sure to put me in a particularly bad cell and to deny me, any comfort. So, for instance, I was in a complete darkness for 5 days. It was very filthy and very crowded. There was 9 of us in a 2 by 3 meters cell, having no access to water or toilet except 10 minutes per day. So basically they knew they couldn't torture me because of the solidarity and the media attention. So they just made sure to try and use every other measure to put me at discomfort or at a psychological pressure. Now, every other person who was arrested in the Mασπέρο incident were tortured severely, and torture is still very systematic in police stations and in prisons and so on, but they knew that they couldn't torture me. Anyway, after 5 days of trying to improve my conditions, we basically started making threats that we're going to, expose this and make a big fuss about it. So they moved me to a better prison, which is the one, which is the one I used to be in back in 2006. And this time they obviously had instructions to treat me very nicely, as nicely as they could. And so I was in a clean room, not very crowded, a cell basically, not very crowded, and I was well treated. But they basically tried to isolate me from the other prisoners, both political and criminal prisoners. They were specifically, they wouldn't use violence with me, but if if I'm out of my cell, you're allowed out of your cell for 1 hour per day, to move your legs and get some sunlight and so on. So if I'm out of my cell and I have a chat with a criminal detainee, the next day if I meet him, his hair is shaved and he's avoiding me and so on, and I realized that then they were putting pressure on anyone who was starting up a friendship with me or trying to talk with me. I'm not sure what they were worried about, but they certainly wanted me to be, isolated without putting me in isolation.
Alaa, you, in court, refused to answer questions of the military court. Can you explain why? And also who you think should be on trial now? You're among more than 12,000 people since Mubarak fell, civilians who have been imprisoned and are being brought before these military courts.
Yeah, these are more like military tribunals, right? They're not proper courts at all. And in fact, in the early days of the revolution, there wasn't even a pretense of being a proper court. Like there were hundreds who were tried in the kitchens of the military prison. The trials would take 5 minutes. They wouldn't be told what are their what the charges are. They wouldn't be allowed defense and so on. Since then, we started quite a successful campaign against military tribunals, against military trials for civilians, and so they had to. Instead of heeding our demand and stopping the practice, they had to improve the show. So then they started pretending that it's a proper court, have 3 judges present. They're not judges, or they're army officers. Allow a defense, let the case take its time, talk about evidence and so on. But in most cases, there will be no acquittal, and there's no proper appeals process. There's an appeals process that in which some military officer decides based on their own whims whether they accept the appeal or not. It's not a legal process, and so on. So basically, it's not a proper court. There's no due process. There are no guarantees that it's a fair trial, and so it is the natural and obvious thing to do, actually, to refuse to appear before that court. I couldn't refuse to appear before it because I was abroad. I was in San Francisco, actually, when my summons arrived, when they sent my summons to my place. So I had to go back to Egypt and hand myself in. Otherwise, they would have, treated me or painted me as a fugitive. But I had to refuse to, cooperate at all in the investigation because it is not a fair trial. But there is also another reason. The military are the guilty party in that incident, and the military rulers, the members of the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, should be the ones who are being investigated and should be the ones who are being put to trial. And so these military officers who will be acting like judges are under their command, so they cannot be neutral, they cannot be impartial. And so basically we refused to cooperate, and we demanded that the case be transferred to a civilian judge, and that we mentioned specific generals, General Hamdi Badin, who is the head of the military police, General Roueni, who is the head of the, I don't know what you call it, the sector of the army that covers Cairo, as the people directly responsible for the killings on the 9th of October. And in fact, the campaign, my refusal to talk, the efforts of our human rights lawyers, and the return of the protesters in Tahrir Square were effective enough so that the case was transferred to a civilian prosecutor. They initially moved it to the state security prosecutor, which is still extraordinary justice. There is no appeals process. But with further pressure, it was moved to a proper judge, and it was that judge who released me. Who ordered my release. I'm still pending investigation, so I'm still accused.
Mm-hmm. The first anniversary of the January 25th revolution is coming up next month. And one of your cellmates in prison said to you that, and this is a quote, "I swear by God, if this revolution doesn't do something radical about injustice, it will sink without a trace." Do you think there's a chance that this revolution will sink without a trace?
No, I'm very optimistic about our chances, but it's very difficult to predict when we're going to make more wins and so on. I think it's going to be a lengthy process. I think the price is going to be very high. I mean, the recent crackdowns that happened like in the past few weeks, there's a sense that they're now targeting people, that the killings are not random anymore, that they're picking who to kill. The intensity of the torture is much higher. I think the whole world have seen how they try to use sexual violence, specifically against women and in public, to strike some fear into us. So what comes next might be even tougher and even more difficult. But I don't think that this revolution is going to end without without really completely renegotiating the order of power in Egypt.
Let's talk about one of
the Arab world.
What I think you've just alluded to. Yesterday, an Egyptian civilian court ruled forced virginity tests on female detainees in military prisons were illegal. Samira Ibrahim, the woman who brought the case against these tests after being subjected to one earlier this year, was cheered by hundreds of activists inside the courtroom yesterday after the ruling was read out.
Today we stand in solidarity with our sister Samira against the various and continuous military abuses, whether they're against Egypt's women or revolutionary youth, with the goal of removing our revolution from squares and streets. But we will never let go of our rights. Whether youth or women, we will always participate. We will not quiet down until we see our country on the right path.
Alaa, the significance of this ruling on the illegality of forced virginity tests.
I think the significance is not actually legal, because what the court ruled is that the action was always illegal. And I think the people who practiced it knew that it was always illegal. So the significance is on a much more symbolic but much more profound levels. In one way, Samira was, Samira talked about her ordeal very early on. At a moment when the military was very popular in Egypt, at a moment when everybody believed that the revolution is over, it has achieved its goals by toppling Mubarak. And also, so just talking about military injustice was breaking a taboo, but also, talking about sexual violence that she was personally subjected to, and the framing of it as a virginity test, so it's not even framed as rape, which is what it is, but it's framed as a virginity test, which brings in question whether she's a virgin or not, and so on. That also took a lot of courage and was breaking another taboo. And for a very long time, for weeks and weeks and weeks, she was subjected to a lot of criticism and a lot of pressure, sometimes from people who appear to be supporters of the revolution, sometimes from people who are among the political elites, and even from from people who pretend to be feminists and so on. And so that ruling represents a wide recognition in Egyptian society and even within the Egyptian state, through its judicial branch, of that injustice, of the truth behind Samira's words, and of the injustice in her ordeal, and
We just have a minute, and I wanted to ask you a quick question about your family. A long tradition of resistance in Egypt. Your father, Ahmed Saif al-Islam, is a prominent human rights lawyer, jailed and tortured under the Mubarak regime. Your mother, Layla Suwaif, well-known activist, professor, founding member of the Movement for the Independence of Universities. Your sister, Mona, a prominent activist, founding member of No to Military Trials Campaign. Your aunt, Adef Suwaif, best-selling novelist and writer. While you were in prison, your wife, Manal, gave birth to your first child, a son, named for Khaled Saeed. And I was wondering if you can wrap, we just have 20 seconds, by you talking about the significance of your child being born while you were in jail.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, obviously, not to attend the birth, but he visited me on his third day, and my happiness and love for him basically made prison tolerable.
Well, I thank you so much for being with us. Congratulations on your freedom. Alaa Fattah, we will continue to follow the Egyptian revolution.
Thank you.
That does it for the show. If you want a copy, you can go to our website, democracynow.org. I'm Éimυ Γκούντμαν with Naren.